Hello, my name is Jacob and this is my YouTube channel. I'm a student of religious studies on Charles University and I'm studying new religious movements. So I've already published one video about Marilyn Manson in connection to Baudrillard's philosophy of hyperreality. Watch that video if you haven't seen it before. But today I want to focus on something different. I will use the theory about new religious movements and new religious cults and how they work. This theory from religious studies, and I will apply it to the cult of Marilyn Manson, to his followers, to the family as they call themselves. So first I have to start with some theoretical background. I'm sorry for that, but it's really necessary for understanding what I'm gonna talk later about. So, new religious movements, as we know them mostly, we associate them with movements which happened in the 60s, 70s, right, with the hippie movements. It's a lot of Eastern religions, but as a new religious movement we could also consider Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology, basically any new religious movement in the modern era. We can even apply this theory, which I will present, to older religious movements. And there are several steps which each religious movement, when it's new, comes with. So the first thing is a religious innovation. That's something that the religious founder mostly brings, and it's fundamental for the revelation of that religious organization. With this comes the second step, and that's always the protest. The protest against the world, against the religious establishment. That's always connected to the religious innovation. And we shall see that in the case of Marilyn Manson too. So then there is another thing. The third step is millennialism and ethnocentrism. So that seems a little complicated, but basically what it's about is millennialism is a tendency in many religious movements to believe we're at the end of times, that there is some apocalypse happening, right? So millennialism can be either progressive, that means that the evolution is positive, that's mostly in Eastern religions, or catastrophic, that's the Western way as we mostly see it, and that's all the religious movements that claim that an apocalypse is coming, that the end is near, and so forth. So that's the third step. And the fourth step that's connected to it is mostly a radical way of leaving the world. And that's something that the movement does and which the members do, right, when they go inside of this movement. So we'll see all this again with Marilyn Manson. The next steps is something which is connected to the structure of the movement itself. So it's mostly about being homogenic and in a way one class of all citizens, communistic in its ways. And the second part, it's dynamic. It doesn't have traditional structures others than the charisma of the main leader. So the charisma of the leader, that's another sign. So most religious movements, new religious movements, they have to have this figure which has this charisma. And now one thing that's very important from religious studies perspective, charisma is not something that is not a quality that a person or a character can have. Religious studies have proved in the 20th century that charisma is a relationship between two people. One that's charismatizing, that's the leader, right? And the other that lets himself be charismatized. So this is important to understand because the fact that most people think charisma is something, a quality that somebody has, that's what's playing in the favor of those individuals like Marilyn Manson, right? So with this charisma comes something in the movement which in the new religious movements we call it enthusiasmos. It's basically the fact that these movements are very energetic, and the charisma of the leader shows that the leader itself is willing to do sacrifices. And through his charisma, through his charismatic relationship with his believers, he makes even his believers to sacrifice a lot of things. And then we come to the end of this, and that's the break, the we, the us, and them, right? When this community starts. That's the last step of the community movement. And now, what every religious movement does through its history is either going more into the radical and fundamentalist way, or going more liberal. And that's something that the theory of denominations works with, that basically most of the world religious organizations started as a cult and they slowly become to get more and more open, right? So let's apply this new religion. We start talking about the religious invention. And maybe you can think, so what did Marilyn Manson invent? Did he invent anything? And we have to start looking at the period of his life which is connected to the era Antichrist Superstar. That is the era when he became Marilyn Manson as what he is today. The Antichrist, the embodiment of something evil, right? And as he presented it in that times, this alter ego should have been something that America has to see to basically battle its evil sides, its evil reflection, right? The bad habits that America has and that are embodied in Marilyn Manson. So that was the philosophy behind it. But when we study it for real, we find out that in this period, Marilyn Manson very cleverly used religious techniques to build his own cult. You can see it in a documentary on YouTube. There is like Rise of Marilyn Manson. And one of the band members, who was a member of the band before this time or at the beginning of it, he mentioned that at the beginning it was all about being different. So each band member was different. And Marilyn Manson, like Brian Hugh Warner, he was different too. And each of the fans who came there, they were able to show their differentness in the world, right? They were afraid to show it somewhere. The concert was a place where they could look how they felt. And that felt safe. But in the Antichrist Superstar era, something changed, he says, the band member. And he says, suddenly it was not about being yourself, but about being Marilyn Manson. So the fans were coming and they were dressed and they were having makeup just like Marilyn Manson, like they saw him. Not like they were like themselves. They were just a copy of him. So this is very important because that's the beginning of his cult, of his movement, of his followers, who are very devoted to him and are willing, many of them, to even kill. And he knows that. So in the last video I was talking about the fact that he was using this fans to threaten women he has abused and so forth. So I'm sure we will see that in the future too. It's very dangerous. So this hyperreal thing started in the Antichrist Superstar era. And how did Marilyn Manson do it? So he combined basically two types of millennialism, which was very smart, right? So most religious movements, they have one type, right? One classical type. which they say to the followers. And then mostly they have a bad look from the outside, right? And they are like a sect to the others. And this is what happened with Marilyn Manson too, right? But there was a difference, a slight delicate difference. The way Marilyn Manson presented everything and the way Satanism itself as a religion, as a new religious movement functions, is that it's somehow a religion of its own, but somehow always antagonistic to Christianity. Or mostly in the European context, we see Satanism to start. This means that Marilyn Manson started playing this Antichrist superstar figure. For his devotees, this was an embodiment of the progressive millennialism, right? So the Antichrist superstar, he's coming to throw down the fascistic Christian system, like they were claiming. They were basically saying, we will demolish this and we will make a new satanic order. There is a brilliant academic work which talks about this. If you buy my book, you can see also the quotations for all of this, or just text me if you need some academic work to what I'm talking here about. Most of these things have been described already, so there is not a problem. And this millennialistic approach was very powerful for young people in that times in America, right? We're talking about the 90s, many taboos are going down, right? There is a president who has a blowjob affair in the presidency, which is virally shared everywhere and talked about all the time. So this was demolishing, and there's the second part which it's connected to, and that's catastrophic millennialism. And that's the part which mostly the parents of those children believed in. They were Christians, like many Americans at that time and even today, and they were scared of Marilyn Manson, right? So the first part is religious. We can see that really a lot of Americans thought, well, maybe this is the Antichrist, right? It's a scary guy who's preaching Satanism, who's preaching dictatorship in the name of Satanism, who's acknowledging that Satanism allows you to kill people morally because you are your own moral god and stuff like this. So this was very controversial, of course, in those times, and it's still today, right? It's a wonder that Marilyn Manson has not been put in prison in those times, right? Not to mention that he's not in prison today. So Marilyn Manson used this persona he was embodying, the Antichrist superstar, to trigger two different reactions, two different religious reactions, which strengthened the whole movement further for many years, right? This was Marilyn Manson was doing in those times. That was not something just for the stage. The people were living through these events. If you look at the Dead to the World tour, which is a video documentary even published under Marilyn Manson, you can see how the singer himself and the band members and also fans were living through these times. You have like girls who write the name Marilyn Manson into their bodies with knives or like other tools. And Marilyn Manson, like I mentioned in the last video, in those times he was encouraging, for example, teenagers to kill their parents if it's necessary to liberate themselves. He was saying that suicide is a way how to escape from this world into your own, where you are your own satanic god. Like I said, he claimed in the songs, on the concerts, he was not only talking about abuse, but he was practicing it. You can read his book, his autobiography, where he himself states several rapes and almost killings of people. There's this one episode which is pretty famous because Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails is involved. So they both claim a different story, but according to what seems, they were under heavy influence of drugs for a several-day binge, like they were doing. And Marilyn Manson, like he was doing in those times with many people, he started manipulating those people when they were in this state of mind to get them to do together something criminal, something evil, something satanic. For example, raping someone, killing someone, or something like this. So they raped a girl together, and after Trent kind of sobered out of this, he understood that Marilyn Manson is basically like a hellish nightmare that consumes you. So from that moment he stopped with him forever, right? And they had this dispute. But Marilyn Manson even filmed a rape in those times when he and the band members forced the girl to drink their urine, and then they raped her under the threat of having her shooten to death and stuff like this. So we have all this evidence. He was the one who released the audio tape, so we know he admitted he's been doing this. But according to some US laws, this is too far in the past and blah blah blah. So obviously he's still free. But what does it mean in the view of this new religious movement? So he brought a religious invention. He was the first one of the new age, of the modern age, who used willingly the figure of the Antichrist, which is mostly attributed to people from the outside, right? Like, they say you're the Antichrist, but you say, no, you are the Antichrist, and blah, blah. That's like Luther against the Pope and stuff. But he came with the invention saying, yeah, I am the Antichrist. And that was something revolutionary. That's connected with the religious protest. That's the second sign of the new religious movements. And you can see even the children listening to Marilyn Manson and protesting, of course, through their teenage years against their parents. But it has even violent outcomes, right? The Christian who tried to put the labels and finally maybe put them about parental advisory on the CDs, his son or daughter, I don't know, died suicide, and he said that the child was influenced by the music of Marilyn Manson. And I don't know if that's true, but I'm sure many children have been influenced by this, by the thoughts, because even me myself have been influenced by his thoughts and his music. This like 15 years ago when I started listening to him as a young teenager. So I can see that on myself and on other people in that time. That's pretty important to understand, right? But this protest against the established religions, especially Christianity, against the government, against police, right? Against the state, against the nation, against the flag. He was burning flags and all this stuff. That was part of his religious protest, and that's always in the religious movement. They have to fight the established religions and then the government, and then they become this like cult or sect mostly. So this is what they did. Millennialism is the third, so we see that. I've already talked about this. And now this term ethnocentrism I've talked about. That's a specific thing which the believers, always in the religious movements, they start believing that they are some kind of special seed, special people, special community, which either in old times has some geographical location as their sacred land. They have to be there suddenly. I'm not talking now about Israel in particular, but about many like other religious cases also, right? So, but in Israel, you have this for a long time. That's the difference. These new religious movements, they suddenly start, right? And they say, well, so my revelation says this is the land, and they go there and they want to keep it and so on. But in most modern times, it doesn't have to be geographical, right? That's why it's called not geocentrism or something like, but ethnocentrism. So it's about them being a tribe. And this is particularly important because this tribe is special. For example, if you take some new religious Christian cult like Shincheonji, which is pretty famous, it believes in millennial things, and because the ethnocentrism is connected with Korea, Holy Zion and New Jerusalem will be there. Mormons, they have the same, but with America, so they have it in Missouri. So that's pretty common, right? But it doesn't have to be connected to the geography, like I said before. It is connected to the thought that the members of the community are somehow special and they will somehow survive death, mostly. So, how is this in the cult of Marilyn Manson? Well, he has a part of his teaching, of his religious teaching, which is called celebritarianism. It's from celebrity and Arianism, which is an old Christian, heretical Christian belief, basically saying that Jesus Christ was a man, but that he had special powers and so on, and that you can attain godhood by being a special type of human being. So by this theology, between the celebrity and between the celebrity or the new religious leader, between this charismatic guy mostly, because it's almost never women, it's mostly guys abusing women in most religious movements. So it's always this guy who starts saying that if you worship him, he will help you to become eternally, like living eternally and stuff like this. So this is how it's connected. The followers worship him, he becomes eternal, and then they are in him because they are, right, his followers, so they will like be embodied by him. But basically they are worthless, they are just material that's got stuck to his power. And this is the celebritarian belief, which I would presume many of the fans of Marilyn Manson really somehow believe. It doesn't have to be specifically or explicitly religious, but it's always there. The feeling that they are somehow special, that if they die together in even some terrorist or attack or some murder, it's somehow special and it's somehow everlasting. So this connection in a cult, I will talk next time in the next video about how this connection to the charismatic leader is breaking down, what moves have to be done so that people become these devotees like Marilyn Manson has. But today I can mix it to this. But remember, it's a topic connected to this. So the next part is, after ethnocentrism, is the radical leaving, right? So that's mostly, in the case of the followers of Marilyn Manson, it's just like leaving home, you know, like all the stories, like rebelling against parents, or the religious implications which he mentions, like on Hand of Law and other, even in Antichrist Superstar, just getting a gun and shooting other people. That's a thing that he's encouraging basically many times in his lyrics throughout his career. And this, I call it hyper-real suggestions. Watch my other video if you want to know what I mean. So this radical leaving is important also to the concept of suicide and mass killing, right? Because you have to have some feeling not only of an apocalyptic sudden near of death and of the end of the world, but also like we have to radically do something, change something. That's what gets these people, these followers, to commit mass shootings, suicides, murders, and others. And I have documented many of these cases. I think I will do a special video where I will mention some of the real schools, not Columbine, but other schools which were shot by followers of Manson and stuff like this. So the next is this group, that's created the cult, the family of Marilyn Manson, how the fans call it. It's very homogenic, and it's one class of people. And that sounds so perfect, because all the followers of Marilyn Manson, they are all in the same position, right? That sounds so good. It's like communism. It's like everybody's poor, so like nobody has it better. Basically, that's what works in this new religious movement. Only the charismatic leader is above them, and all of them, they are the same level, which sounds fantastic, but they are always one level below the leader, right? That's what it's all about. And the second thing is that this group doesn't have specific structures, right? Marilyn Manson doesn't give specific orders on his groups, like it being a church. It's dynamic, which gives it much more authenticity for the people and stuff like this. It's pretty complicated, this part of it, but I think I can do even a video about every step of this. If you're familiar to the theories of new religious movements, then you know, but if you're not, then I'll try to explain it in a different video. So the last step is the group us and them, right? And this border between us and them is mostly connected to some kind of secrecy. A secret, which only the group members know, and they cover it together. That's again connected to the fact, how does a cult even like start to origin, like start to exist? Why do people become cult members? And there is this moment in many of these cults when the cult leader leads some other person into a crime or into murder or some other horrible thing. And this sin, or this like basically horrible thing, is something that connects the cult members, because they have this secrecy about it and they cover each other's backs, right? If you have seen American Stories 7, the series 7 about the cult, you know what it's about. That's exactly how Kay Anderson did it. And you can see Marilyn Manson was inspired by this series, as I talked about it last time, so it's pretty important. I think the charismatic figure of Marilyn Manson really made a new religious movement. A type which... There is one thing, why didn't most religious studies academics recognize this sooner, right? Why is this a new topic? Well, there is one thing. In the last 2 or 3 decades, our world changed a lot rapidly. And that's connected to the hyper-reality I talked about in a different video. But many new religious movements are started to being connected with pop culture. So academics in the 90s, even in the first decades of the millennium, they were not totally ready to search for new religious movements in singers, right? Some of them did, but it's coming to bigger light or under more investigation in the last years. So that's one of the reasons. The second thing is again the secrecy, right? You can see even after Evan Rachel Wood went away from Marilyn Manson, after years after that abuse, she was so traumatized that she was not able to speak out on it. And that's very typical, because the secrecy affects not only the abuser but also the victims, which is pretty interesting. But let the victims be, because we know what the victims said about Marilyn Manson, right? But let's view it again from the perspective of the abuser and of his cult. Because the abusing cult, this secrecy that covers it, that's very important. So how does the charismatic leader obtain this? He already has some charismatic connection, right? So the people are his fans. But how does he create this special feeling that some fans are somehow chosen, and that they are willing to have this secret with him? Like, what secret do they have? And that's the thing, that there is one thing that Marilyn Manson does with all of his main fan groups all over the world. He leaks them throughout his career. Photos and things, videos. Instead of posting them on his social networks, or I don't know, anywhere, his website, he gives it to them to publish, so that they feel this exclusivity. They feel chosen, right? The celebrity, the charismatic leader trusts them. He gives only them this, and that's the laughable thing, because for the charismatic leader, it's nothing. He just makes a fucking photo and gives it to someone, sends it. But for that person, it's like, oh no, Marilyn Manson knows me. Like, there is this special connection, this special feeling of exclusivity, which creates this bond. And that's you can imagine it like a crystal, which amplifies the effect, right? Because for the celebrity, it's nothing. Many of the steps which these charismatic leaders in all religious movements do, they just, I don't know, they take some water and they do like this and they say some blessing, right? But the charismatized person, individual, he imagines all of this around it, right? So for that person, it's like, wow, it's an amazing event. But my goal is not to diminish any religious or deep feelings. But what we need to understand is that many of these charismatic leaders abuse this exclusivity they have and they can give to their followers for their own benefit. And that's not right. That's never right? So that's one way how Marilyn Manson does it. And the other thing, that's what he does, for example, with people in general. I think without mentioning any gender. And then he has this special part of the cult with male members, which he basically slowly manipulates to threaten and attack those women he wants to abuse. And then he has the girls, which again approach him like a charismatized leader. And those are the girls that get abused. And even after the abuse, they still are able to blame themselves. And like, I think Tyler Bird, I don't know, look at the sign at Manson is abusive at their archive. There is even mentioning about some of these women who not only have been abused, but they were not able to speak for themselves, and they were even thinking that they did the mistake, that Marilyn Manson basically convinced them that they are the evil and that they are guilty of something and that the punishment he's giving them is justified. So that's the manipulation he's using onto people who have this charismatic relationship with him. That's why it's so easy for him to get out of all of these crimes. Why people were so long in the secrecy, afraid or happy to sharing the secrets, right? There are also male abusers who attended Manson's rapes, right? So let's not forget those guys who share this common secret, and they have many reasons to help Marilyn Manson cover up his sins and crimes, because they might get hit and uncovered too, right? So let's not forget these power structures that exist and that are inevitably affecting the whole game. So I think today I've explained the new religious movement interpretation of Marilyn Manson. Next time I will talk more about the charisma and about how it can be amplified by the religious leaders, and I will try to show evidences that Marilyn Manson did it throughout his careers with specific fans and people, and that it had a real effect on people's lives. So I hope you like this. In the link in the description you can find my book, which I write about this topic, and I hope you can share this video and let more people know about